I'm sure you've recently heard everyone raving on about Sinners, the new Ryan Coogler film that's taken the world by storm. I was lucky enough to watch this in IMAX recently, and let me tell you, believe the hype. It's a masterclass in screenplay, visual prowess, and jaw-dropping moments that will stick with you long after the credits. If you still haven't seen the movie, immediately book tickets to watch it on the biggest screen possible. There will be spoilers ahead, so come back once you've seen this gem of a film. Despite the just over 2-hour runtime, Coogler manages to squeeze so many themes, ideas, and concepts into a tight screenplay. Cross-genre films aren't new, but Sinners takes this idea to a whole nother level. Yes, it's a horror, but the movie could also be classified as a drama, a period piece, an action flick, a thriller, and even a musical. All of these are very distinct kinds of films, yet Sinners manages to take the 6 genres and jam them into one neat package. The crazy part? It feels entirely natural and even elevates the film from just great to absolutely extraordinary. So how did Ryan Coogler pull this off? Let's explore the world of cross-genre filmmaking and break down the individual elements of Sinners that combine and lift each other up to produce such a masterpiece. First, I'd like to point out that the murky classification of the film was far from a mistake. In an interview with Democracy Now!, Ryan Coogler talks about the links between racism and genre. If you know anything about the history of American music, you'll know that it was once segregated through the use of race records. Even if a white man played the exact same song that a black man wrote, the genre classification would be different, with blues and country as one example. Coogler hence wanted to defy the system in a way and stretch what it means.
I wanted to make a film that was kind of raging against the concept of genre and making the audience constantly question it.
This explains why the movie has so many conceptual elements, but not why they work so well together. How come Coogler was able to combine music, horror, action, and more into one neat little package? To understand that, we first need to step away from Sinners and into the world of cross-genre filmmaking as a whole. To state the obvious, movies mix genres all of the time. That being said, you tend to see a lot of the same combinations, as there exists plenty of natural overlap. Action and sci-fi is a popular pairing, as well as mystery and thriller. The term rom-com exists precisely because romance and comedy gel so well together. Most of the time, this will be limited to just one pairing, however. Occasionally you might get a third, but eventually crossing genres leads them to clash with one another. At least for most directors. Not for Ryan Coogler, however. Why? Because genre is a myth. At least, it's a myth in the way that people traditionally think about them. When you really boil it down, genres are just our best attempt at grouping together films we think are similar. Star Wars and Blade Runner are both sci-fis, but couldn't be any more different in their story and world building. The only reason these two are in the same genre is due to the existence of futuristic technology. I'd even argue that Star Wars is more of a fantasy thanks to its mythic structure and the existence of the Jedi and the Force. A long time ago in a galaxy far, far away sounds an awful lot like the beginning of a fairy tale. See how these classifications start to get murky? When you really think about it, many genres merely describe a film's setting or medium. Western and animation don't really tell you much about a movie's story, just where it's set and how it was made. Other genres are broader, such as thriller or drama, describing the type of emotions a director is attempting to elicit from their audience. Plays back in a day were either a tragedy or a comedy, but even then it's possible to combine the two together. My overall point is that genre is nothing more than a classification mechanism. There will be similarities between different sci-fis of course, but directors don't need to stick to the usual tropes. I don't think Ryan Coogler woke up one day and suddenly decided to make a historical vampire musical. At its core, Sinners explores the injustices faced by Black Americans in the 1930s and beyond. I think this is where he started, then decided on using the blues and vampires to tell his story. I'm getting ahead of myself however, so let's give some quick examples of good and bad genre combinations. Firstly, Challenges, the romantic sports drama that instantly gained cult classic status. This was my favourite film of 2024 and serves as such a great example of thematic coherence. Art, Patrick, and Tashi's love triangle is so intrinsically linked with their chosen profession. The editing and non-linear structure helps to reinforce this, which I talk about in this video on my channel. Make sure you give that a watch if you want a thorough breakdown on the editing of challenges. When Art and Patrick return the ball to one another, it is both in a literal and metaphorical sense. So much of the dialogue is framed like a tennis match, with constant verbal jabs back and forth. The sports genre might act as a setting, but the romance and drama are delivered to us through the language of tennis. Art is announcing his retirement to Tashi in this scene, but that's not really what he's saying. The talk is about his career, but the subtext is actually about their relationship. Both the sports and the romance elements of challenges are full of passion and competition, which is why the genres work in tandem so well. Whenever a screenwriter or director introduces a new element, they must do it with intention. I'm sure you've heard of Chekhov's gun, the idea that you shouldn't show us a gun unless it will be fired later. Unfortunately, Megalopolis didn't seem to get the memo.
So go back to the club.
Now, I have a lot of respect for Francis Ford Coppola deciding to make the batshit crazy movie that he wanted. However, the pretty visuals and cool concepts aren't enough to save it from being incoherent. When Caesar is introduced, he is shown to have the ability to stop time. Unfortunately, there's no real reason to have this in the film. Not once does this power become relevant in his struggle against Cicero. It's only ever useful for his relationship with Julia, however, we still could have removed this time-stopping element and the story would remain largely unchanged. Similarly, the political drama in the first half is completely undone by the introduction of a satellite that burns up part of New Rome. Suddenly, Caesar can now build the city he wants, so what was the point of the tussle with Cicero? Coppola tried to combine history, sci-fi, politics, and fantasy, however, it doesn't work because there's no thematic cohesion. Megalopolis feels like a bunch of cool ideas thrown in a pot with very little connecting them together. Lucky for us, Sinners links every element in a satisfying way. Just really quick, a majority of my viewers aren't subscribed. Please double check that you are, and hit the bell to be notified when I release more videos. Now, let's dig deeper into why this film was so successful at marrying together its different genres. When you really boil it down, the horror, musical, and historical dramas just contextualize the setting of the film. In fact, you could argue that these classifications merely arise from three main conceptual elements: vampires, the blues, and 1930s America. We can visualize these as points on a triangle, representing the broad strokes of the story Coogler wants to tell. Most importantly, we have to draw lines between each one as all are connected. Sinners is genius because the three genres are intrinsically linked from beginning to end. This is quite obvious in regards to the time period and music. The first act of the movie revolves entirely around Smoke and Stack setting up their juke joint, hiring townsfolk and convincing their cousin Sammy to be the centerpiece of the show. However, this doesn't mean that supernatural elements aren't present early on, just that they exist in more subtle ways. Obviously, there's the opening animation, explaining their place in cultures across the world, in addition to the quick jump scares cut between a traumatized Sammy. We also have an intimate scene with Smoke and Annie, where some of their conflict stems from the latter's belief in the occult. There's a lot to take in during this first hour, with every scene setting up at least one new Chekhov's gun to be fired later. It doesn't become overwhelming, however, because everything can be traced back to the juke joint. This is the anchor which the entire plot revolves around, which makes sense because it's the setting for the majority of the film. Let's therefore put this at the center of our triangle, and now we can start drawing connections. The blues are self-explanatory, being intrinsically tied with the history of Black America. Somehow I doubt Sammy was planning on performing one of Remick's Irish jigs. The music also links nicely with the horror elements too. In one of the best scenes of the film, Sammy's music is shown to have the power to call upon the spirits of the past and the future. We got hints of this earlier, with his father stating that it would bring nothing but evil. Horror and music don't seem to gel together at first, but suddenly it feels a lot more natural when you make Remick's overall goal to possess Sammy's talent. The head vampire's Irish background was also a genius way of drawing a connection back to the time period. Being subject to colonialism in Europe, his argument of vampirism being an escape from racial injustice starts to sound very tempting. When we join each point on our triangle together, a multifaceted narrative begins to emerge. Keep in mind that although I've made this nice symmetrical graphic, this shouldn't give the impression that Sinners is a simple story with clean, easy to interpret symbolism. So much of the film is open to interpretation, and everyone is going to have their own thoughts on what it all means. The first act spends so much time setting up the characters precisely because they're not one-dimensional. Everyone has complicated histories, emotions, and often makes decisions on a whim. The point of this triangle is to visualize the interconnectivity of the themes and concepts present in the movie, even though it might mean something different to every viewer. Now that we understand how these three varied genres work so well together, it's time to tackle the other half. The real meat of the story is the way in which Sinners conveys it. The eventual climax of the vampire and clan attacks feels so cathartic because everything has been building up to those moments. This is where I want to discuss the other three genres I mentioned at the start: drama, action, and thriller. While the triangle might give us the setting and core elements of the story, these three describe the method in which it's delivered to us. If half the genres are baked into a cake, the other half can represent the fork and mouth we use to eat it. In fact, they just end up being a natural consequence of the story Coogler is telling. There's a reason horror and thriller are combined so often. Having your audience on the edge of their seat right before a big climax makes the eventual shock so much more powerful. Rather than resorting to cheap jump scares, Sinners stirs the pot and builds up tension steadily. I absolutely love the decision to use traditional vampire lore where they have to be invited inside the building. The second act is filled to the brim with suspense simply due to this one quirk. The vampires keep having to come up with more and more convincing arguments if they wish to enter the juke joint. As family and friends keep turning, it gets progressively harder to ignore their emotional attachments. It's a back and forth game of cat and mouse, so we are on the edge of our seats until someone decides to make a move. This is only possible thanks to the first hour of drama and character development. Coogler takes his time to flesh out everyone's backstories, relationships, and motivations, meaning that when the vampires arrive, we actually fear for their lives. Too many horror flicks skip this and go straight to the scares, but that just means we have no reason to care. In Sinners, plenty of screen time is used for smoke and stack to converse with old friends and lovers while planning their juke joint. It's simple, but each character having their own personal history with the twins also makes for effective exposition. We don't need an infographic of their traits or boring introductions, as interactions with the townsfolk tell us all we need to know. Every bit of dialogue serves more than one purpose, giving us some backstory, foreshadowing future events, and fleshing out personalities. As one example, Stack's line of coming back home to deal with the devil we know not only hints to his treatment in Chicago, but foreshadows the eventual arrival of vampires and clan members at the juke joint. If drama is our setup and the thriller elements keep us on the edge of our seat, then the eventual action is the catharsis. The second Grace yelled, "Come on in, you motherfuckers," my jaw dropped. I got to watch this in IMAX too, so the aspect ratio change made this moment even better. Sadly, by the time I upload this video, the movie won't be in IMAX theaters anymore. You can blame Thunderbolts for that one. Still, let me know in the comments if you are lucky enough to watch Sinners on the big screen. Despite the carnage, however, Coogler is smart enough to not let all that setup go to waste. Even during the attack, we get some heartfelt dramatic moments, such as Smoke having to kill Annie to stop her from turning, and his tussle with a vampiric Stack. My personal favourite, however, is Sammy's interaction with Remick. Despite reciting the Lord's Prayer, it doesn't deter the vampires. In fact, they mock his belief in God by reciting it back to them and performing a twisted reverse baptism. It's actually Sammy's guitar that saves him, becoming a powerful metaphor for what music means spiritually. This is why he refused to let go of it at the end. His blues might have summoned evil, but it was also the thing that protected him, not religion. You'd think this would be the climax of the film, however, shortly after we get a sequence where Smoke gets to go Rambo on a bunch of clan members. The extra action makes for some fun adrenaline, but this isn't its only purpose. The clan has been a shadowy force lurking underneath the entire film, demonstrated by the sawmill owner, the couple Remick first turned, and his claims about their plans for shooting up the juke joint. The action only exists in the first place to reinforce the themes of racial injustice. Even if the vampires never arrived, the juke joint was doomed from the beginning. The clan was always going to show up and slaughter everyone regardless, never allowing black Americans the opportunity to let loose after a hard day's work. It's also a powerful ending to Smoke's story, getting to join Annie and their baby in the afterlife. Without this scene and the mid-credits sequence, we wouldn't get such satisfying conclusions to the stories of Sammy and each twin. Combining 6 different genres together is no easy task. However, Ryan Coogler does it with ease. The historical, musical, and horror elements help to establish the setting of Sinners. Once this is done, the drama, thriller, and action sequences arise naturally from the story itself. Our end result is therefore a cohesive unity of genres, made possible through a tight screenplay. The movie is just over 2 hours long, however it manages to express so many themes, ideas, and emotions in such a short time. This is a film that can easily be rewatched and talked about for weeks after the credits roll. I'm glad to hear it's doing well at the box office, and I'm excited to see what Coogler does next. If you enjoyed this breakdown, be sure to leave me a like and subscribe for more videos like this one. Hey, I was about to say that.